You know how they say water is life? Well, this deep dive is about when water uh, decided to redraw the map. And not in a good way.
Yeah,
We're talking Hurricane Helene.
right.
You probably remember its coastal impact. But this storm, it went way beyond the usual hurricane havoc.
It really did.
It's almost eerie how Helene's fury unleashed catastrophic flooding so far inland, deep in the mountains of western North Carolina.
Erie is right, yeah. We're talking 1 in 1,000-year flood levels. To put
Yeah.
that in perspective, that means a flood of this magnitude in that location statistically should only happen once a millennium.
Wow.
But here it was.
That's just mind-boggling, isn't it?
Mhm.
And we're going beyond just the casualty numbers with this deep dive.
Right.
Though those are heartbreaking enough, believe me.
Uh-huh.
We'll uncover why Helene hit this region so much harder than anyone expected. And we'll hear the deeply personal stories of those who lived through it.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how the CNN article that we're diving into, it weaves together these eyewitness accounts with expert analysis to create this very human picture of a natural disaster. It's one thing to read about rising water levels, but it's another to understand what that looks like, sounds like, feels like to the people caught in it.
Absolutely. So let's transport ourselves to Elk Park, North Carolina.
Okay.
Imagine a couple, Kim and Rod Ashby, building their dream home.
Right.
This isn't just any house.
No.
It's raised up on pillars, a good 20 feet above ground, near the Tennessee line.
Wow.
2 years of work. Their hopes and dreams literally built into this place.
Yeah.
On that Thursday, as Helene was wreaking havoc hundreds of miles away on the coast, the Ashbys stopped by the house to check on it.
Right.
Light rain was falling, but they felt safe, understandably so.
Of course. And what's almost eerie is that the National Weather Service, they had been sounding the alarm for days leading up to this,
Really?
warning folks that this wasn't going to be your typical hurricane. They predicted the mountains were in for a perfect storm of conditions, even before Helene made landfall.
The article calls it a historic combination of threats. Heavy rain, obviously, but also a huge risk of flash flooding and landslides.
Right.
This wasn't just a coastal storm surge.
Right.
This was a whole different beast.
And a big part of what made this so dangerous was that the ground was already completely saturated
Oh.
from previous rainfall. Think of it like a sponge. You keep adding water. Eventually, it can't hold anymore, right? Any new rain just has nowhere to go but sideways, creating those sudden, violent flash floods we heard about.
And it wasn't just the rain itself, right? You mentioned something about the mountains actually making things worse.
Absolutely, yeah. The Appalachian Mountains, with their steep slopes and narrow valleys, they actually exacerbated the situation.
Wow.
Instead of the rainfall spreading out over a wider area, the mountains acted like giant funnels, channeling all that water into rivers and creeks. It's a meteorological phenomenon. We call it orographic lift.
Orographic lift. Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah, so basically, as moist air is pushed upwards by the mountains, it cools and condenses, leading to much heavier rainfall than you'd see in flatter areas.
So the mountains essentially turn themselves into giant rain-making machines.
In a way, yeah. And unfortunately, Asheville, where a lot of the worst damage occurred, sits right at the convergence of two major rivers, the French Broad and the Swannanoa.
Oh, no.
It's a geographic feature sometimes called a catch basin, and in this case, it was like aiming a fire hose at a bathtub. The water had nowhere to go.
So you've got this recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
The saturated ground, the funneling effect of the mountains, the unfortunate geography of Asheville is this catch basin.
Right.
And the result?
Uh,
Well, over 100 confirmed dead in North Carolina alone,
right.
and hundreds more unaccounted for, even a week after the storm.
It's hard to even wrap your head around numbers that big. But what we can't forget is that each one of those numbers represents a life,
Right.
a family, a story forever altered.
The Ashby story, which we started with, that's a stark reminder of that, isn't it? We left off with Rod clinging desperately to a piece of debris after their dream home was ripped apart by the flood.
The article describes him getting tossed around in the current, getting tangled up in trees and debris.
Oh, wow.
It's a miracle he survived.
A miracle, and yet such a bittersweet one because Kim, his wife,
Right.
she was swept away,
Yeah.
and they still hadn't found her when this article was written.
It makes you think about all the families left in limbo after a disaster like this.
Right.
The waiting, the uncertainty, the desperate hope.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of devastation.
It's more than just the immediate loss of life, too.
Right.
The article talks about the sheer scale of the destruction, destroyed roads, downed bridges, entire communities cut off from the outside world.
And those who survived the initial flood still faced incredible challenges. Rescue and recovery efforts were massively hampered because the very infrastructure needed to reach people, the roads, the bridges,
Right.
was gone.
The article mentions some communities could only be accessed by helicopter. It's hard to even imagine the logistical nightmare of trying to get aid to people in that situation.
And even when aid does arrive,
Yeah,
there's the long and difficult process of rebuilding. Imagine the psychological trauma, the uncertainty,
right.
the long road to rebuilding lives and communities shattered in an instant.
Yeah,
It's something we often forget when we hear about these events on the news, the long tail of recovery.
absolutely. And it's not just a matter of rebuilding infrastructure, is it? It's about rebuilding lives, rebuilding communities.
Right.
And that takes time.
It really does. And it takes a different kind of strength, a different kind of resilience. The article highlights this really poignant example of that. A father in Maggie Valley named Joseph McElroy, he has these 6-year-old twins.
Okay.
And to them, the whole experience was like a big adventure.
It's amazing how children process these events so differently.
Yeah.
Their understanding of loss and tragedy isn't fully developed yet.
Exactly. But in this case, the twins' favorite teacher, someone they were incredibly close to, actually drowned during the storm.
Oh, wow. So this father is now faced with telling his children that their adventure claimed the life of someone they love dearly. That's heartbreaking.
It really highlights the ripple effects of these disasters.
Right.
The emotional and psychological scars can run much deeper and last far longer than the physical damage.
And as if the loss of life and the emotional toll weren't enough, there's the sheer physical devastation left behind. This CNN article, it doesn't sugarcoat it.
No?
It talks about the stench of death lingering in the air, towns that were literally wiped off the map.
Yeah.
Even looking at the photos, they said it doesn't quite capture the scale of the destruction.
It's a stark reminder, isn't it? For all our technological advancements, for all of our carefully constructed infrastructure, we're still so incredibly vulnerable to the raw power of nature.
Yeah, and it makes you think about those communities that were already struggling before the storm hit. How do you even begin to rebuild when everything is gone? Where do you even start?
It's a monumental task, and it really highlights the importance of proactive planning. You know that investing resilient infrastructure, especially in areas prone to these kinds of extreme weather events, that's crucial. But it's not just about building stronger bridges and better drainage systems, though.
Right, it's about the human element too, isn't it?
Exactly. The community response in the wake of this disaster was incredible.
Yeah.
The article talks about neighbors helping neighbors, strangers sharing what little they had left. People even used pack mules to reach those who were stranded because the roads were impassable.
There's a line in here that really struck me. It said, people wrote their names on tarps, hoping someone would see them from the air and know they were still alive.
Wow.
It's both heartbreaking and incredibly hopeful at the same time.
It really speaks to that indomitable human spirit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even in the face of just unimaginable loss, there's this instinct to survive, to help others, to find hope. And those acts of kindness and compassion, however small they may seem, they become lifelines in those early days and weeks after a disaster.
Absolutely. And we saw that outpouring of support from outside the affected areas too, of course. But there's always that question. How long will that support last?
Right.
As the news cycle moves on, will these communities be forgotten?
That's the danger, isn't it? We can't let these communities slip from our collective memory. The recovery process is so long and arduous. It takes time, it takes resources, and it takes an unwavering commitment to help these communities not just rebuild, but thrive once again.
So where do we go from here? It's easy to feel overwhelmed, even powerless in the face of such massive destruction.
Yeah.
What can one person do?
It's a question worth pondering, isn't it? But remember those stories of resilience we talked about. The neighbors helping neighbors, the strangers becoming lifesavers. They offer a glimmer of hope and a reminder that even small acts of kindness and compassion, they can make a world of difference.
It's those small acts, that sense of community, that's what will ultimately make the difference with despair and recovery. And for Kim Ashby's family, well, every passing day brings more uncertainty, more heartache. Her story, still unresolved, is a poignant reminder of the human cost of this disaster, a cost that lingers long after the floodwaters recede and the headlines fade. It makes you wonder, what can we do, each of us, to be better prepared for when, not if, the next 1 in 5,000-year event inevitably arrives? Because as Helene taught us, the power of water to reshape lives and landscapes was not to be underestimated.